This month, the United Kingdom announced a new package of sanctions targeting Russia's so-called shadow fleet, a flotilla of aging oil tankers that Moscow uses to deliver crude in defiance of international restrictions. It was one of the most devastating blows against Russia since the start of the war in Ukraine. In July 2025, 135 oil tankers were blacklisted, which since early 2024 had illegally transported Russian crude worth about $24 billion. These vessels are usually operated by private shipowners through networks of offshore companies, so-called ghost entities, making them extremely difficult to trace. Britain's Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, emphasized that the new measures are designed to further cut off oil money flowing into Putin's war chest. Alongside direct restrictions on tankers, two companies were also sanctioned: Intershipping Services, which registered shadow fleet vessels under the Gabonese flag, enabling them to ship up to $10 billion worth of goods annually on behalf of the Russian state, and Litasco Middle East, a subsidiary of Lukoil, which transported large volumes of Russian crude. At the same time, the UK backed the EU initiative to further lower the global price cap on Russian oil, from $60 to around $47.6 per barrel, in order to slash the Kremlin's energy revenues. Crucially, this cut applies only to Russian crude and to oil from third countries that source it from Russia. Major exporters such as Norway, Canada, or the United States are exempt, leaving the target unmistakably clear: Russia's economy. The Shadow Fleet is a network of mostly old oil tankers Russia has been assembling to deliver crude outside the clean market. This fleet began to take shape after February 2022, when the US, EU, and UK imposed a $60 price cap and embargo on Russian oil. By the end of 2023, its size had grown to over 1,000 vessels. Investigations revealed that it already carries about 70% of Russia's seaborne oil exports. Many of these tankers are bought from Western owners via chains of offshore companies, allowing sellers to pocket huge sums. Recent studies found that Western shipowners alone earned at least $6.3 billion from selling hundreds of ships that later became part of the Shadow Fleet. To understand why the July 2025 sanctions are so damaging, one must see how Russia built this system. The fleet relies on evasive tactics and loopholes in international maritime law. Practically from the moment Moscow invaded Ukraine, when the West struck at oil exports, Russia began creating this ghost fleet. It already had one of the world's largest merchant fleets, over 976 cargo vessels and 387 oil tankers. But not all were suitable. The ideal tanker for shadow operations needed to be old enough to disappear into the global fleet, yet sturdy enough for long voyages. The sweet spot was 15 to 25 years of age. Ships that had changed hands several times, but were not yet falling apart. Then comes concealment. These vessels frequently switch off their automatic identification systems, the maritime equivalent of turning off GPS. They go dark for days or even weeks, making satellite tracking almost impossible. When they reappear, often in international waters, they conduct ship-to-ship transfers. Crude is pumped from one tanker to another in the open ocean, frequently onto another shadow vessel flying a different flag. To disguise these operations further, the ships are registered under flags of convenience, mainly in countries that do not strictly enforce Western sanctions, such as the Cook Islands, Eswatini, Malta, the Marshall Islands, and Panama. Some of Russia's clean tankers were transferred to management companies in the UAE, while others were re-registered under foreign jurisdictions, making them appear formally independent from Moscow. This allows them to dock at international ports without immediately drawing the attention of sanctions enforcers. All of this makes tracking and enforcement extremely difficult. If one flag is compromised, a captain can simply re-register under another convenient flag in a different registry. The result is one of the most sophisticated sanction dodging schemes in modern history, now directly targeted by Britain's latest measures. The sanctions announced by the United Kingdom in July 2025 focused on the key links of Russia's shadow fleet. The accompanying statement noted that 137 entities were targeted, including 135 oil tankers and two companies. The tankers, which had illegally carried about $24 billion worth of cargo, were banned from receiving services such as insurance, brokerage, and port access from British and other Western firms. British authorities stress that these measures undermine Putin's shadow fleet and deprive Russia's war budget of critical oil revenues. The insurance scheme is no less cunning. Since Western insurers refuse to cover illegal sanctions-busting operations, shadow fleet operators turn to Russian firms or providers from countries like Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, two landlocked states that have suddenly emerged as major maritime insurers. Such coverage is minimal and often worthless, but it is sufficient to satisfy the formal requirements of port authorities. As of mid-2025, maritime analytics firms Vortexa and Windward estimate that Russia controls around 1,100 vessels in the Shadow Fleet, directly engaged in sanctions evasion, and another 900 vessels in the so-called Gray Fleet, suspected of periodic violations. Together, this accounts for nearly 17% of global oil shipments. If almost one-fifth of world trade in crude is taking place outside the legal framework, it starkly illustrates how dependent Moscow has become on this system. Oil and gas have historically made up 30 to 50% of Russia's federal revenues, generating over $100 billion annually in good times. When Western sanctions took hold in 2023, these revenues fell by more than 40%. The Shadow Fleet became Putin's solution, and it worked, perhaps too well. In 2024, it brought Russia an additional $9.4 billion beyond what the country would have earned under full compliance with sanctions. That amounts to roughly 15% of Russia's pre-war military budget, enough to finance several months of its war against Ukraine. Most importantly, the Shadow Fleet maintained cash flows that allowed Moscow to avoid immediate economic collapse and to prolong the fighting. After the new sanctions were introduced, the situation began to worsen. By mid-2025, British assessments indicated that Russia's combined oil and gas revenues had dropped by more than a third compared with early 2022. Moscow's countermeasures have grown increasingly desperate. Some vessels carry multiple transponders to create false electronic signals. Others use GPS spoofing to broadcast fake coordinates. Some even coordinate at sea to swap digital identities. Yet these tricks often create new opportunities for exposure. GPS spoofing is relatively easy to detect by cross-checking different satellite systems, while multiple transponders leave a distinctive electronic fingerprint that can be even easier to trace. In the end, the technological balance is shifting in favor of enforcement rather than deception, much like what can be observed on the battlefield in Ukraine. Of course, a single sanctions package will not change the situation without international support. But for the EU, coordination is easier. It is a multinational structure with resources and established mechanisms. For instance, the Repo Task Force coordinates actions by the US, UK, EU, Canada, Japan, and Australia, pooling financial intelligence across jurisdictions. In March, they created a dedicated working group on the Shadow Fleet to extend these capabilities to maritime trade. If British intelligence identifies a new operator in Dubai, the information is quickly shared with the EU, US Treasury, and G7 partners. Within weeks, sanctions can strike the entire network, not just individual ships. Similarly, the Nordic-Baltic 8++ initiative provides regional cooperation on protecting critical underwater infrastructure, pipelines, and cables. The closer this coordination becomes, the harder it is for Russia to find gaps in the control system. With Russia's growing isolation, even smaller countries that previously relied on only a few percent of Russian exports will likely follow Europe's lead and secure alternative suppliers. By the autumn of 2025, the current measures will begin to take full effect and are expected to be expanded in 2026. This could seriously undermine the economic foundation that allows Russia to wage its current war of attrition. The question today is no longer whether these sanctions will work. The real question is whether they will act quickly enough to end the war before Russia's economic collapse triggers even more desperate and dangerous actions from Putin's regime.